Hello and welcome to another episode of Journey to the Rise. I'm your host, Lucretia. In today's episode, we talk with Paul Moore, a man who has been successful in all of his endeavors. With a passion for nature and plants, Paul found his way into the family business working as a manager at More and More Garden Center. Photography found its way into his life, and that led him into a successful career as a photographer. Nature always remained front and center for Paul, and his expertise in plants, specifically moss, has brought on new opportunities for him. Paul is a brilliant example that you can gain knowledge and education in a non-traditional way and still find great success in your life. Paul is a delight and has wonderful stories to share with us, so let's not wait any longer. Please welcome my guest, Paul Moore. I am really excited to speak with our guest today. He is all things outdoors. He's knowledge beyond and filled with wisdom, and just having a conversation with him is always the most delightful thing ever, and I am so excited to dive in and talk with him. Paul, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, Lucretia, it's so wonderful to be here and to catch up with you.
I'm so excited. So I just want to kind of kick it right off. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in rural Williamson County, south of Franklin, Tennessee, on a farm, about a 530-acre farm,
Wow.
and lived there until I was about 13 years old.
Wow. So being on the farm, were you always outdoors and was it a cattle farm? Did you have animals?
My dad was a farm manager, and they had cattle. They grew tobacco. All the things, those sorts of things. He managed all that. And I got to play on the farm, in the barns and in the creeks and in the woods. And at the time I didn't realize it was something special, but it was, years later that those formative years that created the path that I'm finally on now.
Yeah, so you got to grow up as a farm kid. That's really fun. So where did life lead you after high school?
Well, I spent about a year and a half in college, and school and I never did get along. And formal education, it was just like I learned differently. I don't know if I had some kind of learning disorder or whatever, but the traditional classroom did not suit me. And so after about a year and a half, I went into the garden center business. And my dad was already kind of in that business, and he was a partner in a business, a garden center business. He said, "Come on." He referred to me as boy. He said, "Come on, boy, and join us." And I didn't have an alternate plan, so I had to come up with something. So I went into the garden center
Oh,
business.
wow. I think with education, so many people, we get trapped into this idea because we're in it for so long, from 5 years to 18 years, of this traditional way of education. And it's not suitable for everybody. And there's different ways to gain knowledge than sitting in a classroom that's not a fit for you. So I love that you figured that out.
Well, when I was growing up, if you didn't fit into a certain box, you didn't exist. You weren't on the radar. If you're a guy and you didn't play sports and and do all those kind of things, then just like, what good were you?
Right?
Of what use were you?
Mm-hmm.
So, now, both of my daughters are now, young ladies, went to Montessori school. And if I always think now, if I'd have had that kind of schooling, that kind of, learning, I would have probably learned a lot more, or learned, how to work around some of that. But yeah, lots of new options now for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. So you get into the garden center business. Where did you begin with your experience, and how was that thrown at you?
Well, again, the time I got into the business, I could care less about plants. It was just a job. And then after some years into it, my dad and I got the opportunity to open our own garden center, More and More Garden Center, in 1980 in Nashville. And So, at the time my dad was 60 years old. He gambled his life savings on this venture, this new venture. And my mom came along, soon after we opened the business as a bookkeeper. And so, at that time too, I wasn't particularly excited about plants, but it was at least it was an opportunity to 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 learn about plants and to kind of establish myself, at the time. And it really wasn't until probably about 7 or 8 years, 6 to 7 years probably, in the business where, I was really going through burnout. I was working 70, 80 hours a week. It was just, we would get trailer truck loads of plants or mulch and we'd have to hand unload all that. And I mean, there was no free time. I actually lived in a little efficiency apartment in the garden center business. And, if I had a bill to pay, mom and dad took it out of their savings to pay it. It was like, it was that lean. But to kind of de-stress, to find a way around working all those hours, I kind of rekindled an old interest I had in photography. I've been photographing since I was probably 19 or 20 years old. And so I took my camera and would just, every chance I could just escape early in the morning or after work, I'd head to the woods and would spend time in the woods, just kind of a way to de-stress and just to enjoy what was around me.
Wow, that's amazing. And is that where you started to kind of like hone your craft? Like, were you taking any classes in photography? Like, how did you learn that skill?
Self-taught, basically. Back then, there just weren't really any avenues to really learn unless you could apprentice under somebody. So all mine was just, self-taught. At the time, oh gosh, maybe at some point there were a workshop or two out there that you could go if you could sign up for something, but mostly it was just reading books and just, photographing. And of course, it was all film then. And I tell people I was able to improve by having a trash can next to me. So when I was taking photos, I would just, bad photo, bad photo, bad photo, and you just keep doing that until you kind of learn it. And
Wow.
it was during all that process that I, in my hikes in the woods, I started turning my interest toward like, well, I'm in the garden center business, but I don't know what these trees are, and I don't know what that shrub is. I don't know what that wildflower is. I'm like, what's wrong? What's wrong with this picture? So I started really studying and like just taking pictures of some of the wildflowers I was seeing and just really turning on the radar and trying to notice what was around me. And so, and then I started researching a lot about chemicals that were sold in garden centers. And back in the 80s, I mean, the chemicals that were sold were horribly toxic. The fungicides and the herbicides, all those different things were horribly toxic. And then I started thinking about, well, we have Japanese boxwoods and Korean lilac, and I'm like, why are we carrying all these plants that are not from around here? What's wrong with this picture? So it was this synergy of like starting to learn a little bit about what I was seeing on my hikes and researching the chemicals. It's like, I don't want to be around this, and I wanted to find a new way to garden if I could. And it was at that time really that got married and we built a house in the woods. And I thought, I have an opportunity now to do something different. I didn't know exactly what that was, but I knew what I didn't want to do. I didn't want Japanese boxwoods, Korean lilac. I didn't want to use any chemicals. So I just started experimenting. I'd started developing some interest with some of the customers that came in that had wildflower gardens, and they would share a few of their plants, and I would plant them in the garden, and I'd observe them over time, and I just kept slowly adding as I could find plant material, and it wasn't often that you could find it. There weren't really many commercial growers that were growing those kinds of things. So that's where it really started the seed, kind of for the new life that I eventually was lucky enough to fall into.
Wow, that's amazing. And during this time when you're working so much and taking your hikes, how did you end up meeting your wife?
She actually came into the garden center one day,
Nice.
and she she came into the garden center, and she would, my mom might, wait on her when she came in, or my dad, and one day, she'd come in regularly, and at one point, she was getting ready to drive out, and my dad pointed to me like, "Hey, I think that gal wants to talk to you." So I stopped her car as she was driving out, and I kind of leaned into the car, and I saw she had some running shoes in the back seat of her car. And I said, "You a runner?" And she goes, "Oh yeah, yeah, I run." I said, "Well, me too." So we started talking about running, and well, some months later, our first date was an 11.1 mile run in the park. So
Oh
that was our first
my
date.
gosh. Wow. That's amazing. That's fantastic.
And that was really the only opportunity that I could have met anybody anyway, because I was always at the garden center.
Right, right.
So she came to me, and it worked
The
out. So
universe aligned so it would make it happen. I love it.
that's right. That's
So
right.
you're working at the garden center, you're taking these photos. Like, how did you start using your photography in conjunction with your work?
Yes, but not initially. Initially, again, I got so interested in just the photography again by hiking that I got really into nature photography. And so in 1988, I went to the Crested Butte, Colorado Nature Photography Workshop, where all my heroes, all my mentors were teaching this weekend long class in the mountains of Colorado. And it was one summer, and I went out there, and of course, what people don't realize, the summer out there is really their spring when all the wildflowers are blooming. Well, I hadn't seen really many wildflowers blooming when I was in the garden center business, because that was in the spring when I couldn't leave. So it was kind of the heyday of the coffee table books, and there were a handful of photographers that traveled the country and would photograph with these large format cameras, and just they'd stay on the road maybe 6 to 9 months of the year photographing. So I got really into photography in a very, very serious and deep manner, and actually befriended one of the instructors, Will Clay, who today he is like my best friend.
Nice.
And every year, every summer, he'd say, "Pick a place out west and fly out, and I'll pick you up, and we'll spend a week or 10 days photographing."
Wow.
So I did that for years. So the chance to photograph with your mentor, and hang around him and learn from him, and just be out in the wilderness together with somebody that really understood it and appreciated it was kind of magical. Well, knowing that I would never be able to compete with somebody like that if I ever decided to do something like that full time, I knew that that wasn't going to happen as long as I had the garden center. So what I started doing, I'd take shorter trips, more like to the Smoky Mountains or even in the local parks. But then I started, focusing my camera on my own garden, which at the time I was just filling full of native plants, and learning about native plants and photography kind of at the same time. And I really wanted to just keep photographing, because that's how you improve. So I could literally walk out into what I call my outdoor studio and photograph plants. And so that's what really kind of started the photographing plants part. And the thing that really was the real life-changing moment for me is one day after the garden was really looking good, after about 7 years of growing native plants and wildflowers, I took a photo of the garden in its peak, and had a large, like 16 by 20 print made, and I put it behind the cash register at the garden center, and just show people what I was doing. And customers would come in, then they would point and go, "Where is that, in the Smoky Mountains?" And I said, "No, it's in my garden." And they're like, "There's no way that's in your garden." I said, "Yeah, it's in my garden." And so that kind of started it. And then people said, "Well, I want to see your garden." So I started inviting customers up and to show the garden, and realized that there was some excitement being generated there. And I finally, said, "I think this is a thing." So I ended up sending photographs of it to Fine Gardening Magazine in Connecticut, and they really liked what they saw, and they soon sent an editor down to interview me. about my garden and asked if I would photograph my garden for them and write an article about it.
Wow.
So that's what started my career really in garden photography.
That's amazing. We are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have more from our guest Paul as he talks about the request to photograph his garden turned into an unexpected freelance photography opportunity. Are you utilizing your email list? Do you know that with the right message you can convert sales and grow your business with an effective email messaging system? If you would like to know how to grow your business, build a connection with your clients, please go to girlbosscopywriter.com to set up a 30-minute free consultation and find out how Girlboss Copywriter can enhance your business. The goal for any business is to grow and reach a new level. Get there faster by being an authority in your industry with a video docu-series. Using video, you can showcase you, your business, your staff, products, services, and your why. Building relationships is key, and a high-quality video can give existing and potential clients a way to get to know you. It is also a way for you to build a connection that results in increased sales. Utilizing video can help customers get to know you on a deeper level, which builds that relationship that makes people want to support you and your business. If you would like to know more about how you can enhance your business with video, contact girlbossproductions.com today. Welcome back to Journey to the Rise. We continue our conversation with Paul, and he talks about how he balanced his time between working a full-time career at the garden center and a full-time photography business. And from there, where did things lead for you with that kind of opportunity? Because you're still working at the garden center.
Well, yeah, yeah, I did have my day job. Uh, the cool thing about it was they asked me at that point after the article if I would start photographing for them as a freelance photographer, and I went, heck yes.
Yeah.
So I started doing assignments, and I could take, at that point the garden center was going, uh, well enough that I could take a day or two off and travel, somewhere to photograph an assignment for them. So I would do assignments, and often they would just contact me and say, hey, do you have a photograph of a particular wildflower or plant? And at that time, I was transitioning over to digital. And if I didn't have it on film, I would go, I could go out into my garden and photograph it and send it to them just, almost instantly. Or I knew where I could photograph that either in a botanical garden or a client's garden. So that really started all that. And then I started a stock photography business, selling to calendar companies. Eventually ended up with my photographs with Getty Images, and they were marketing my photographs worldwide. So that was a lot of fun. So that was a period there where I was doing lots of stuff for magazines and book publishers and calendar companies.
Wow. That's amazing. Did you ever have an experience when you were out photographing someone's garden and maybe the journalist was there to write the article and came across a plant that nobody knew what it was?
Um, Quite often, actually.
Really?
I used to photograph for land. I would photograph sometimes even for landscape architects, and what was great about that because it was great. I loved great architecture, really, fine design, as well as plants. And I'd be in a client's garden, and they would ask me with something, what is that? And although my true love is with native plants, being in the garden center business, we sold everything from geraniums to marigolds to every kind of exotic tree you can imagine. So, even to this day, I'll have people, send me a text that, hey, Paul, what's this? And it could be moss or it could be a tree or a shrub. And that's actually one of my favorite little games to play or things to challenge me to keep what I call keep the chops sharp.
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty fun. I love that. That had to be a fun experience to be able to kind of solve that mystery for people and educate them on what they had in their own garden.
Well, you get to see a lot of gardens and see some things that you might not you know, ordinarily see. And and again, although my first love is native plants, when I started photographing other types of gardens, it's kind of I gave a great example might be like, oh, maybe you love a particular meal, but you can't eat that meal all the time, and you want a little variety. So I started, photographing things I would never grow myself, but it was still fun to shoot because you would see cool plants and some neat architectural elements or some cool garden statuary or some features that oh yeah I can enjoy that, I could dig that, that could happen in my garden.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
again, just to keep photographing, just to keep practicing and practicing and practicing.
That's awesome. So during this time when you're able to get a couple days off, you're still working at the garden center. Like now your hours have increased. Like what kind of weeks are you facing during this time? Because it sounds exciting, but it also sounds exhausting.
Well, I was able to, the more the business got, going along, I was able to take a little more time and not have to worry. We had more staff and that kind of thing. So I would look for any opportunity I could to get to get away from the garden center.
That's
So,
awesome.
that's kind of the evolution of that.
Yeah. And you have this amazing wife. I'm imagining she's being supportive and encouraging during this time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then, some 10 years ago or so now, I don't remember exactly how many years ago, I sold my garden center business to my nephew. And you know, I remember the day exactly, the circumstance. Every summer would come along, and then you'd be exhausted from spring, and you go, I can't, I can't do this anymore. I'm burned out. And then you'd take a break in the summer, and fall would come along, and you'd feel a little rejuvenated. And then you'd go right back into spring again, and you go, oh God, here I am, doing it all over again. But one summer, 10 years ago or so, I looked at Nancy and I said, I can't do this anymore. And she'd heard me say that in prior seasons, and she kind of said, yeah, yeah, it's a tough. She kind of nodded and acknowledged. And I said, no, you didn't hear me. I said, I can't do this anymore. I am done. I am fried. And she goes, okay, let's figure out what we're going to do.
Wow.
So again, I ended up selling the business to my nephew, and she was totally supportive. And so at that point, it was like I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew what I didn't want to do anymore.
Right.
So what I could do then was see if I could make some kind of career out of the photography. So I jumped headlong into photography full time.
That's amazing. And so you're selling the garden center, you're starting a new business. There's a lot of moving parts going on. You have were your girls still at home? Like how did you manage all your time?
Well, back in the early days, even before I sold the garden center business, you know, it was extremely difficult because I used to tell people that I did floodlight landscaping. I would get up, way early, 4 or 5 in the morning, and go turn the floodlights on, and go outside into the garden and plant or do things, and have my quiet time. I had to have some, peace and quiet, and so it was very difficult juggling all of those things, and I don't think I juggled them that well. But you just sometimes momentum in life carries you along, and I never did really in all the years adapt to the stress and the pace of the garden center business. You were either 100% full on or you were like 100%, you know, turned off. And I'm more of a methodical in how I work, and I like to think about what I'm doing and be more intentional. And in that environment, I was just more reactive, and I just felt like it was just robbing my soul. It was just taking everything that I had that I valued and just tossing it out the window.
Yeah, and so many people find themselves in that almost cornered. And they're in that position where they're in something that is draining them and it has that kind of pace and it's exhausting. And I am so grateful that you have a supportive wife who said, okay, let's find a way. And you dove into photography. And what did that transition look like? Like, were you pitching like publications? Were they finding you? How did you find your gigs?
Well, first of all, just mentally going from, being around people and talking, all day long for, 8 or 10 hours a day, 6, 7 days a week, I went to a totally quiet environment. And I literally had to do a mind reset. I mean, I was so used to that stimulation that I had to it took me really a year or two just to deprogram from 35 years in the garden center business. I had to find this new space that I could begin from. So a lot of self reflection, looking at all of that kind of stuff that was deep inside. Uh, so from that point, after I kind of got my bearings, then I said, okay, well, I've got connections with so and so and so and so, so I have to reach out to the different publications, and again started really actively marketing my photos, and joined different photography organizations, and then I started photographing all the porch projects from my wife's company, the Porch Company. I started photographing all their projects, and that was great for her, and great for me too. Again, just to stay in practice, and I would meet clients kind of indirectly through all of that, but just actively marketing my own photos, was a big deal, and getting signed up with a stock photography agency was a big help as well.
Wow. And with your garden knowledge that led to your successful career for you as a garden and landscape photographer, are there any photo shoots with a publication that kind of stands out to you?
Oh, there's just sometimes a lot of funny things that happened, or crazy things. One of the wildest ones, years ago, kind of before there were cell phones, I was doing this photo shoot for Fine Gardening magazine in Alabama. And it was at this church. And this church had these really extensive gardens. It's really a beautiful place. And so I went the day before, I drove down, and the day before someone took me around the garden and showed me everything and said, well, you can come back tomorrow morning. You'll have the whole place to yourself. So the next morning, I get up there, first light, got my camera, I'm walking around with my tripod, and I set up on the first scene. The light's great. It's just wonderful. It's just me in the garden. And I set up, and all of a sudden I hear this, and I'm going, oh my gosh, that's an irrigation system.
No.
So I start seeing this irrigation thing going on. I said, well, I'm thinking, this is a big place, no problem. Grab my tripod, go to another area, set up, start to photograph, and all of a sudden,
Oh, no.
the irrigation system goes off again. So I did the entire photo shoot outrunning the irrigation system.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, it was, it wasn't funny at the time, but
Right.
I mean, it was like I had no recourse. I couldn't reach anybody on the phone, and I didn't want to turn the irrigation system off. So it was just outrunning the sprinkler heads the entire time.
But you got the shots.
And other times, yeah, that's right. And I actually ended up making a list that was almost a funny list of the things that can happen to you while a photo shoot, or just things to look out for. Burned out bulbs, or you're photographing and a dog gets out and tries to attack you. I mean, just a myriad of things, that can go wrong, or you set the alarm system off by accident, or they forgot you were coming and the place is disaster. I mean, I've had all those things happen to me, and I actually, on a real important shoots, I would send this list out. These are the things that you can do to help me make this a successful photo shoot.
That's wonderful. Now, I recall there was a workshop that you attended, and the instructor was supposed to be like this expert on like plants and like different things. And I believe there's another attendee, and he was like asking him about this, and he was like turning it over to you to answer these questions. Do you remember this workshop that I'm referencing?
Yeah, I'm surprised you remember that. was just kind of a funny moment. It was a Arizona Highways workshop, and my best friend Will Clay, who's actually used to was a professor at of botany at the University of Arizona, and he they asked him a plant question, and he looked at me and he goes, Paul, ask him. He's the plant expert. So I just thought it was funny, here's the botanist guy. And I thought, he could answer it, but I ended up answering it for her. So it was just kind of a funny moment.
That's wonderful. I love it. And after years of photography, it seems the woods has come calling to you, and it's your interest and knowledge of moss has become more of a focus.
Yes, it has, and quite by accident. About 5 years ago, I'll kind of preface it with this. About 5 years ago, I took a personal commitment to go as deep as I could into the things I love related to nature, to really take it next level. So I began this reading like crazy, reading book after book after book, doing lots of research, talking to people throughout the industry, and really trying to just deepen my love and knowledge of plants. And then at one point, I was kind of evaluating my garden at home, and it was basically all native plants, just a few odds and ends that weren't. And I had this grass lawn, and this grass lawn was requiring more maintenance than anything else I was doing. And I'm like, even though I was using organic, fertilizers on, I said, there's just got to be a better way. So, one fall, which is the time that you would normally sow new grass seed, I had this one area in the grass lawn. I said, I'm not going to sow any grass seed, and most of the area of the grass was dead or dying anyway. So I just said, I'm not going to do anything, which is hard for a gardener to do.
I bet.
We want to manipulate everything. So I decided to do nothing other than I did notice in this one area there was a patch of moss, and I said, well, I wonder what happened if I just let that moss grow. And so what I did that winter is I kept all that debris off of it and pulled up what little dead and dying grass that was in there. And so I just observed, I watched, and then by that spring I noticed that this green haze had formed over where this bare soil was. There wasn't a going on, but I knew something was changing and happening, and this original patch of moss had gotten bigger. And by, the next year, it was really starting to fill in. And by the following year, it was all moss. And
Wow.
I'm like, oh my gosh, this is cool. And so I posted some photos on House Magazine and started sharing some photos of that, and then eventually converted the rest of my lawn over to moss. And the next thing I know, it's created this craze. The people are just like loving it. And Garden Design Magazine came out, ended up doing a feature on it. Southern Living Magazine came out and did a feature on it. Wall Street Journal interviewed me 2 years ago about it, and it used one of my photographs and included in the interview. And now I lecture about moss, and people want to know all about it. And of course, I can guarantee you I can bring it up in just about any
I love
conversation.
it. I love it.
So moss is I tell people I'm a moss evangelist now. So
And I believe, if I remember correctly, there is a particular coffee shop that when you walk in, there's chants of Moss Man, Moss Man, Moss Man.
yeah, Frothy Monkey are in town. I got lots of friends over there, and a lot of times I'll wear my T-shirt, that says Moss Man, or
Oh,
can you see this?
yes! I love it!
The Moss
The
Movement.
Moss Moo.
It's slow.
That's fantastic. And your
So I've had a
workshops.
lot of fun with that.
Yes, and your workshops they sell out. And with you speaking about moss, where do you think this interest has come from with something that is so often overlooked, but yet clearly it's very much loved?
Well, I think a lot of it is moss really kind of has kind of a storybook feel, kind of an enchantment related to it. People have some childhood memory of, playing with moss, or seeing some fairy tale, with moss as a feature, or someone might remember a particular hiking trail. They're out hiking and they see moss covered boulders, and they just like the idea of it. And then they never thought that it could actually be something practical that they could, have in their own garden or have a moss garden, or just to understand its important role in nature. I mean, it's vital, its role in nature. So I think people, and for me, it's this metaphor for, moss is slow, but there's this patience, there's this steadiness and enduring quality to moss that really draws me to it. And once you really start to study it, you realize how many different varieties there are, and really, again, how important they are in nature.
Wow, I didn't even think about there being different varieties to moss. I just thought there was moss.
Oh, just only 22,000 worldwide.
Holy cow. That's amazing.
It grows on every continent, and they've even found, to show you how durable moss is. It's 250, 300 million years old. It was the first land plant, the first migrated from this primordial soup onto land, some many millions of years ago. But it's endured every epoch, through history. So you can imagine what it's been through
Right.
to survive. So it's pretty cool stuff.
That is amazing. And I was going to ask about its durability. Is this something that we can have in our yards? Can we play on it? Can we do yoga on it? Is it easily damaged? Like,
It's I tell people you can do everything. You can't roughhouse on it. You can walk on it and it's actually fine, and the moss likes it. But you can't play football on it. It just, and if an animal gets in it or whatever and just disturbs a little bit of it, you can just flip the moss back over. It's pretty easy to repair.
wow.
And I have a little, what I call my little moss nursery. In case I get a little bit of damage, I just go over there and take a patch of the moss and just put it right back
I
on.
love it. And have you noticed an increased draw to nature in gardens? Because it seems like it's becoming more prevalent. And do you think that might be because of like 2020, because we were forced to slow down? Do you see like this draw to being connected to Earth? Like,
I think all of that, even before, the pandemic, there's been movements throughout the years of just really more sustainable gardening. Typical gardens just take so much water and fertilizer and just and the lawnmowers, and the pollution created from all of that. So I think there's been that interest over time with the pandemic. People were kind of like forced into, going out into nature, because just, to find some place to keep from going stir crazy from being inside all the time.
right, right,
And I was certainly blessed in that, we live in the woods and I have access to the woods. So, I think I fared better than a lot of people because it's always been, my source of sustenance and peace. And so I think people are definitely caused them to turn inward and outward to quieter places, that more healing type places. So, hopefully the many people that went to nature will have learned from that and will want to not just go back to their old lifestyles again, to love it and to spend more time in it.
right. And it seems like those who had to return to that hustle lifestyle they were living, they quickly identified this is not a fit for me. And they, at least what I've noticed in like social media posts and the news, like there's been this shift to the outdoors and connecting with the earth. Are you getting comments like that in your workshops that you're teaching?
Well, I think people are starved for a different kind of experience, whether it be work or lifestyle or whatever. And I was fortunate to have almost like stumbled into mine. And but you can just tell in conversations that people want to know. Like, well, kind of questions you're asking. To me, it's beneficial from an aesthetic level, but it's also a deeply spiritual, fulfilling thing for me to spend time in nature. And I'm not the only one. A lot of great writers have written about it and inspired other people to get out into the woods. And even just the biochemical aerosols that trees emit are beneficial. They've known that through wood air bathing and Shinrin Yoku, just breathing in those beneficial compounds just make us physically and mentally in a lot better condition.
Yeah, and I think when people find the word you use was spiritual, and that's so accurate because I think when people get their hands in the dirt, they touch a tree, like hug a tree is a thing, and I think there's a reason why it's there's that connection, and there's something very peaceful and calming that you can't really find anywhere else.
That's right. I 100% agree. Just being out in it as much as you can and learning to develop an eye and appreciation for even the most subtle thing, whether it be moss or a tiny wildflower or whatever it is, to tune in to those rhythms is so beneficial
Yeah.
on so many
Yeah,
levels.
absolutely. And if someone's wondering, like, is moss a fit for them or their yard? Is there requirements that someone needs to consider if they want to be successful in growing moss?
Surely, I tell people you're a candidate for moss if you can't grow grass, because moss likes basically the opposite of what grass does. Grass, needs lots of water, lots of fertilizer, lots of intervention with, fungicides and herbicides and all of that. And, moss likes a little bit more shaded conditions generally, but that's not always the case. Compacted soil, maybe poor drainage, that kind of thing. And you're a candidate. I tell people if you already have some moss growing somewhere in your landscape, then you're probably a candidate to grow at least more moss. I think what the big mistake that a lot of people do when they see my moss lawn or hear about moss lawns, they want to just convert this huge area. And I encourage them to start with a small area, learn all the little particular, start with just a little, small area with a bench or something, and plan a small area to learn what the moss needs and what it requires and the maintenance involved, that kind of thing. And then you can expand out from that. So those are the real considerations.
That's awesome. And I love that moss can grow in sun. I always thought it needed to be a very heavy, I guess because I've always seen it in the woods, I just associated that it needed to be a very shaded area.
Well, there's a type of moss called Hedwigia moss, that I've seen growing on a slate roof that's 100 years old in full sun.
Whoa.
Now, it's really crazy because when it gets dry, it just shrivels up and looks like little wire brushes. But just the least bit of moisture, and it's just lush and green, just almost instantly.
Wow. That's amazing. I need to look that up. That sounds fantastic. Now, if there's someone who's like struggling with their new at gardens, maybe they're struggling with their garden, is there any kind of blanket advice you could share with someone out there who's new or just kind of stumbling to get started?
Just with a garden in
Yeah,
general,
with a
or
garden in general.
it's all about the soil. You got, there's more life below the soil than there is above. So you want all those good healthy microbes and organics in the soil. So getting the soil right's the main game, and picking the right plant for the right spot. Learn if you've got a wet area, there are plants that like those conditions. If it's a sunny area, learn what those plants are. So, I know the impulse in the spring when everybody's excited is just to go get a plant and just stick it in the ground.
Yeah.
But, what does it need? The sun, the light, the soil, all those things. So, doing a little bit of research and not being completely overtaken by your garden enthusiasm in the spring, just to be a little more thoughtful and to, again, so many things benefit from being planted in the fall or even in early winter, because the root system of plants will actually, in the Middle Tennessee area, will continue to grow all winter long. because even the air temperature is cold, the soil will stay warm for much, much longer, so you get that root activity. So if you plant a tree in the late fall or in the fall, by spring it's a little further along. So don't plant everything in the spring. Then it's for, especially like trees and shrubs, some of those things that could be too late or require that you have to do a lot more watering and intervening through the season.
Wow. So I guess it comes back to slowing down and doing your research instead of rushing.
Yes.
Garden seems to be the
Right.
theme seems to be like slow and steady wins the race.
Right. And you don't want to treat your garden like your work. You don't want it to be like, how many things can I get done, in one weekend, you know, be methodical and like for my garden here, it's a spring ephemeral garden. Most of it happens very early in the spring. So what I do is I get basically everything set in the fall. So when spring comes, I can just enjoy it for months before I have to do like weeding or doing anything like that. So timing is critical to take advantage of it, to not work yourself to
Yeah,
death.
absolutely. Yeah, get out and enjoy it. Like you said, don't make it work. And you do garden. Do you still
That's
do
right. That's
some
right.
garden consulting? And if so, like what is your process to work with someone in their outdoor space?
Yeah, I do. I don't do any design per se. And again, I'm not really doing this. I'm retired now. I do it more for fun. I tell people that, if it's not fun, I'd just rather be walking my dog in the park, you know,
Yeah.
or playing in my own garden. So, but I do enjoy when I've got time to do consultation and go to somebody. I love going to like a unique piece of property that's got a lot of plant diversity on it and do what I call walkthroughs, where you just walk the property and identify stuff for them and say, oh, that's a special wildflower or that's a special tree, and teach them about what they have. And if they have moss and they're interested in that, I can identify the moss and help them, know more about that. Or even if a homeowner, I can walk through and say, well, that plant's diseased, or I would use this kind of plant in that situation because the soil is wet. So I do that, when I have time and on occasion.
Nice. And if there's someone out there who feels college is not a fit, maybe they're not 100% in what they want to do or pursue, what advice would you have for them?
I think, certainly I'm ones that would certainly say that college was certainly overrated for me. And in college now, people are starting to look at that differently. It's like it's not for everybody. Find some interest you have and go deeply into that. If you could mentor from somebody, or just, I'm studying and reading all the time. I'm just excited about what I don't yet know than what I already know. So be a lifelong student and just learn everything you can. Take classes, read books. I mean, there's so many workshops and opportunities to learn, and just find that thing that you love. And whether it's a trade school or whatever, just take the deep dive and the commitment, put the time in to learn it, and enjoy the process. Because if you don't enjoy the process, you're not going to care about the end result.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. And what are your goals for this upcoming year?
Oh gosh, I'm doing some what we call editing in the garden. Some plants that have been in for 25 or 30 years have gotten overgrown, so I'm moving some things around. Every year you lose some amount of plants due to field mice, voles, or some other animal. So I'm always kind of adding to and tweaking. I've got a garden tour here in April. Kind of getting ready for that. I've got some workshops and some nature hikes I'm leading this year, and so I'm pretty filled up with doing those kind of fun things.
Yeah, that's amazing. And if someone wants to find out more about your upcoming workshops, your hikes, how can they find you?
Oh gosh, the best place is really probably social media. I mean, I've got two websites, jpaulmoorephoto.com and mossmanconsulting.com.
Nice.
But social media is probably, probably the best place to find me on Instagram at J Paul Moore Photo. Um, that's where I post most of what's going on.
Yeah, you're a very fun follow on Instagram. Your photos are very inspiring. And if you have any kind of interest or passion for outdoors, that's where you want to be because you share some amazing images.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I know you're very, very busy, and it's just such an honor to have some of your time to just share your knowledge with everybody. You're such a delight.
Well, thank you so much. I just hope that I've given somebody a spark to get out there and enjoy it and appreciate it and learn more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it with Paul Moore. Next week, we talk with Bren McLean, an author with an award-winning book, One Good Mama Bone. She talks about how inspiration can be found in the most unexpected places.
But about 5 in the morning, that next morning, those woeful, guttural sounds, Lucretia, woke me up.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I get dressed, I go out to the pasture, I see the mama cows huddled at this corner fence calling for their babies, the babies doing the same. And I just got to say, I just had this like electric current go through my body. And I knew instantly in front of me was the missing piece in my motherhood story. Here's what I needed. I needed these cows. I needed their stories.
Hey, thanks for listening to Journey to the Rise. Please do follow us on your podcast app so you have the latest episode downloaded. If you want to follow us on Instagram, our account is at Journey to the Rise Podcast. This episode is research produced and edited by Girl Boss Productions. And please remember to be kind to yourself. When you are kind to you, it is easier to be kind to others. I'm Lucretia, and you've been listening to Journey to the Rise.